Welcome to the clinical cookout. Cookout.
Hey y'all, Auntie Ashley at the Clinical Cookout here, and today is Friendly Neighborhood Therapist Friday. The theme this week was racial trauma, a look inside of our DNA. If you think it's difficult to talk about it, imagine what it's like to live it. This is our lived experience as Black people in this country and in this world in general. I want to do a lesson today, just give y'all some facts about the things that have occurred throughout history in this country that have led and continue to lead to us experiencing racial trauma. Before I even get started, just know that it is okay for us to be angry and enraged and all those things. Like I want people to stop feeling like they don't get to be angry about stuff like this because it is still very much prevalent in this country. And I also want to say something to our non-melanated counterparts. When you tell us we are playing the race card, we are playing victim, you are actually contributing even more to the racial trauma. That is a microaggression to continue to say things like that because we don't have to play the card. It's on the table. We don't have to play the victim. We have been the victim in this country, and we are still the victim of discrimination, police brutality, systemic racism, all of that. So we don't have to play anything. Let's get into it. Now, if we are going to talk about the origins of racial trauma in this country, we have to start with the most horrific period of time in this country, which would be slavery. So let's talk for a minute about the transatlantic slave trade. So during the slave trade from approximately 1526 to 1867, some 12.5 million captured men, women, and children were put on ships in Africa, and approximately 10.7 million arrived in the Americas. Now, the number discrepancy, of course, is because the Middle Passage was dangerous. A lot of captured men, women, and children did not make that journey. Now, to give you a little context about that Middle Passage and how dangerous and horrific it was, the sexes were separated. Men, women, and children were kept naked, packed close together, and men were chained for long periods. About 12% of those who embarked on that journey did not survive it. Fast forward, another piece of history that heavily contributes to racial trauma, lynching. White Americans used lynching to terrorize and control Black people throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. So what is a lynching? It is a public killing of an individual who has not received due process. Lynchings were violent public acts that white people used to terrorize and control Black people in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly in the South. Lynchings typically evoke images of Black men and women hanging from trees, but they also involved other extreme brutalities such as torture, mutilation, decapitation, and desecration. Some victims were even burned alive. A typical lynching involved a criminal accusation and arrest in an assembly of a mob, followed by seizure, physical torment, and murder of the victim. These were often public spectacles attended by the white community in celebration of white supremacy, and photos were often sold as souvenir postcards. Also, body parts were given away as Lucky Charms. Now, according to records maintained by the NAACP, from 1882 to 1968, 4,743 lynchings occurred in the U.S. Now, we know those numbers are probably off. Everybody is not accounted for, but even with just that number, that is relatively high. It's impossible to know for certain because there was no formal tracking. The highest number of lynchings during the time period occurred in Mississippi with 581 recorded. Georgia came in second with 531, and Texas was third with 493. Some of you might be thinking, well, but some Black people succeeded. Some of y'all made it out and did well. Like they're trying to teach in Florida right now, slavery taught us skills. So here's the thing. Yes, our people have always excelled and been resilient to the extent of creating our own towns where we thrived. We literally thrived and things were going great. But notice the key word here is were. So in this country, every time we tried to do that, tried to have our own little safe space where we could thrive and succeed, there was a problem. There was a problem at every turn. So between 1831 and 1954, at least 50 towns, cities, and counties in the U.S. violently expelled all Black people. When I say violently expelled, these towns were bombed. People were massacred. There's more than just Tulsa. We always hear about Tulsa now, which that wasn't even, a lot of people did not know about Tulsa. Even to this day, there might be people who've never heard about the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre or race riot, which it wasn't a race riot. Let's call things what they are. Call a thing a thing. It was a massacre. It was a genocide. They bombed an entire town for no other reason than sheer jealousy and hatred. So there were over 50 black massacres between 1900 and 2000. So we going all the way up into the 2000s. So, of course, Tulsa is one of the ones that people talk about, but there was also Rosewood. There's a movie about Rosewood. There was also the Harlem Massacre, the Elaine, Arkansas Massacre, the Knoxville Massacre, the Columbia Massacre. I am saying massacre. If you look this up, it will say race riot. I refuse. It wasn't a race riot. That's not what it was. Me defending myself against you attacking me is not a riot due to race. It's you attacking me and me using self-defense. It is a massacre because they decimated these towns in these cities where black people were trying to thrive. And let's be clear, there are still towns that are predominantly black. Okay, there are still towns. But when we talk about these towns, like, you know how you will hear that Tulsa was called Black Wall Street? Well, we had other Black Wall Streets in other areas, such as DeWitt, Nebraska, Allensworth, California, Eatonville, Florida, Whitesboro, New Jersey, Highland Beach, Maryland, Weeksville, New York, Langston, Oklahoma, Brooklyn, Illinois, New Philadelphia, Illinois, Rosewood. We had towns where there were literal banks, hospitals, schools, and it was all black, and we were doing well, and they burned them to the ground. Another thing that led, and still honestly leads, to racial trauma are sundown towns. If you've never heard of a sundown town, this is a town in which black people or people of color are not allowed to be in this town once the sun goes down. These towns still exist, and there are sundown towns in every state in the country. So these sundown towns were also areas of violence. You could not even drive through them after a certain time, or you might end up in a really bad situation. This is why we had the Green Book, which told black motorists where they could and could not stop. The earliest record of legal restrictions on the nighttime activities of black people dates back to 1714, an act to prevent disorders in the night. The discriminatory law used bigoted and racist language to blame Native Americans, blacks, and mulatto slaves for all the illegal activities happening after nightfall. The law made it a crime for any person of color to be out of their home after 9 o'clock p.m. Now, the highest concentration of sundown towns today is the Midwest. All right, y'all, let's fast forward to today so that we can get a real picture of how this is still very much prevalent and very much so causing racial trauma to black people in this country today. So, in 2021, the FBI reported that 15,136 law enforcement agencies submitted incident reports involving 7,759 criminal incidents of hate crimes. That was the highest number reported of hate crime incidents since 2008. But here's where we pull out the racial part of this. Hate crime incidents targeting people because of their race make up the largest category of hate crimes by far. Out of more than 10,800 people who reported that they were the victim of a hate crime, 61.9% were targeted because of their race, ethnicity, or ancestry. Bias against African Americans overwhelmingly comprised the largest category of race-based hate crime incidents, with a total of 56% of race-based hate crimes being motivated by anti-black bias. Hate crime incidents targeting people because of their race increased more than any other category between 2019 and 2020, rising from 3,954 to 4,939 incidents. Attacks targeting black people saw the largest rise, from 1,972 to 2,755 in 2020. People are even more open about it now. There was a time where people were less open because it was less acceptable. But now we live in a world where it is becoming acceptable again, and that is very problematic. Racial trauma is real, and we really out here living this experience. We are really out here concerned for our livelihood and well-being every day in this country because we never know what it's going to be. All right, y'all. Please join us next week, and I will holler at y'all later.